our establishment have deliberately forgotten about it. The one huge thing they're still working on is the NHS. And that is why the NHS, consistently, they reorganise it. A couple of years later, they reform it. They meddle with it, they interfere with it. They put in managers who do their level best to break the morale, particularly of the nursing staff, by all the crazy things they make them do, and the excessive amount of pressure they put on them. It's quite deliberate, because they're going to privatise the whole of our National Health Service, to turn it into a for-profit corporation. But they know if they said to the British public, they'd be out on their ear. No one would vote for that. Nobody. So what they're doing instead, they've got their solution over here. But right now we're over here. How do they get the public to move from here to accept their solution? They create the problem. And the problem is a collapsed National Health Service, an overmanaged National Health Service, a health service where there's far more bureaucrats than there are nurses. And then once it gets that bad that it's collapsing, then they say, look, we've got this solution, and it's ever so nice, and it's a privatised health service. That's what's going on here, and the senior police chiefs are part of this same conspiracy, and I don't use the word lightly, by our liberal elite to loot our Commonwealth and to line their own pockets. And they're in on it. And that is why the police force actually interfere with our democratic rights and then stand and turn a blind eye while the far left attack us when we still have the temerity to insist on exercising our democratic rights. That is the scam that's going on. And if you think about the actual definition of fascism, the fascism that the boys flying and fighting and dying in planes like this were involved in fighting, the whole point about fascism was, one, using violence against political opponents, and you've seen that tonight from the New Labour fascists, and that's what those people are. There's no point calling them Reds or far leftists. They are funded, encouraged and sponsored by Labour Party MPs and Cabinet Ministers. They are the Labour Party's plausibly deniable militia, just like in Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe has gangs of tribal thugs doing his bidding. There is no difference at all. They're not isolated leftist cranks. They are mobilised, paid and encouraged and protected by the Labour Party, without a shadow of a doubt. So that's one aspect of their new fascism. But the other point about fascism was the very heart of it was an extraordinary close, in fact disgustingly incestuous, connection between government and giant big business. And that's exactly what Blair and Brown are building right now. It is a fascist corporate state. Make no bones about it. And the people who suffer are ordinary people, through having their rights taken away, through having their livelihoods taken away, for having public services which the boys from this war and from the ones before came home being told they could get a land fit for heroes. That meant council housing. That meant a health service which was there to help people who paid in. Not every sponger from all over the world who comes in and never paid in a penny. It was there to help the needy and the deserving of our people. It was part of the promise, the solemn promise by the liberal elite at the end of the First World War and especially the Second World War, and that is the promise they're now reneging on. And because this party dares to stand up and say that and to campaign on that issue, that is why they hate us, that's why they fear us, and that's why you saw Tony Ward here covered in blood tonight. It's an absolute disgrace. Don't ever forget what you've seen, tell people what you've seen, and make sure that people understand this is our masters. We have to deal with them, we have to break their power, we have to get rid of them before they first of all take away our rights, and then they so swamp this country with alien peoples in order to keep their vote up that in the end they get rid of us. That's the choice. Is it going to be them or is it going to be us? I say they're the ones who've got to go. But there's a second reason why the Labour Party, the Labour government and the police chiefs are so frantic right now. They seriously believe, and they're right, that we have a very, very good chance of winning seats in the European election. And as Arthur said, there's only a few, there'll only be a few, there might only be one. But it's the beachhead which will show that we're going to go on and win far more seats, win far more power and far more influence. And that absolutely terrifies them. It terrifies them because they want their noses in the trough, and they don't want anyone else coming along and getting their noses out of the trough. We don't intend to put our noses ever in the trough. But they're not fussed whether we do or don't. All they're worried about, they're the pigs in there at present, and they want to make sure their snouts stay in the public purse. So that's one of the reasons that they're opposed to us so vigorously. But there's another one, especially from the police. Our masters, which includes the Tory party, because they're the ones responsible for more than anybody else, as you know, in the last 40, 50 years, they've turned this country from being what the former head of the BBC described as hideously white, i.e. an English or a British country. They've turned that into the most overcrowded country in Europe, which is also one they proudly say is the most diverse, in inverted commas. They've taken a homogeneous society where we're all basically the same, and they turned this place into a Tower of Babel. And they know that it's extraordinarily unstable. David Blunkett said, I think 2.5, 3 years ago now, he said that Britain's race relations are like a coiled spring of tension. And if you come, as a few people here come from Blackburn, or Burnley, or for that matter Liverpool from a few years before that, you know perfectly well what kind of thing they know is going to happen, not by us, not by our people, but by some of those enrichers they brought in. You know what's going to happen when the coiled spring snaps. It's a massively expensive disaster for them. And when you consider that in 1968 and 1970 it took the entire British Army, which in those days was a sizable institution, to keep the two communities in Northern Ireland apart, people who when they walk down the street can't even tell who's who. And when you think the level of violence, the level of hatred between particularly the Muslim communities in this country and everybody else, and when you consider that in 1968 when the two sides started fighting, they were fighting with bricks and with bottles, whereas now in any large city in Britain, if you know the right pub to walk in with £1,000, you can buy an Uzi submachine gun and then ammunition to go with it. That is what they're scared of. They know perfectly well that their multicultural experiment, which you could say was at least half peaceful and almost worked when there was an economic boom going on, when it comes to an economic bust, they know that the whole thing is just an utter disaster waiting to happen. And that's where we are right now. You can see it, not least, you can see it on two levels. One is the increasing aggression by certain members of ethnic minorities, or certain minorities, towards us and our people, and the police and all the rest of it. And the other actually is the fact that our people have finally stopped muttering into their beer, or swearing at the television in their own house, and are now actually openly saying enough is enough and something has to change. And we've seen it in the last couple of weeks with the British Jobs for British Workers protests. Never since 1968, when a handful, relatively speaking, of dockers and meat porters from East London marched in support of Enoch Powell when the Tory traitor Ted Heath threw him out of the Shadow Cabinet for daring to warn about immigration. Never since then has there been a single case when a single British worker has got up and said, I'm going on strike, I'm protesting, not about wages, not about conditions, but for the right of people like me to have the first crack at jobs in Britain. It's a huge sea change. Those men at Immingham and all the places that came out afterwards, closer here at the